I'd had a couple concussions before, no major impacts from those. But as I recovered, I started feeling better. I was back at work. I was definitely tired, and my summer had been so stressful that I was tired. And then things just started getting weird. I started having very high anxiety, like to the point where I was going home and drinking during the day because I just felt like that was helping. I found myself doing that and realized, oh, this isn't good.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. So, funny story. Today's guest not only has a remarkable story to share, but also has the dubious distinction of having dated me more than 20 years ago. Don't worry, she exercised much better judgment in the years that followed. Lindsay Nohl is just glad to be alive. There were many moments over the past 2 years when she was not at all sure that she would be much longer. Lindsay's story is one of profound mental, emotional, and physical anguish, a remarkable recovery, a new lease on life, and a new outlook on life too. And Lindsay courageously brings her whole ordeal and what she's learned from it to this conversation to encourage and serve all of us. This episode is packed with insight about choosing courage in the face of fear, the sacredness of the present moment, the power of empathy, and how mortality can propel us to live with even more guts, gusto, and abandon. This is a tremendously life-affirming story. But the journey to life-affirming passes through a prolonged season of desperation when suicide was on the table for Lindsay. For some of you, this part of the story might hit too close to home, so I wanted to be sure you were aware in advance that it would come up. Lindsay currently lives in Victor, Idaho with her 2 dogs, Owen and Brady, where she serves as executive director of a nonprofit called Mountain Bike the Tetons. She is also a mountain bike coach and certified life coach. Prior to moving to the Tetons, Lindsay spent 18 years working for the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS, as a field instructor, director of the Southwest program, and in other administrative roles in Arizona and Wyoming. She's a lifelong athlete, and her initial passion for soccer carried into her early 20s. After attempts at playing soccer professionally, she dove headfirst into various outdoor sports like rock climbing, canyoneering, caving, and more recently, mountain biking. Today, her favorite outdoor adventures are long bike-packing trips in the desert Southwest. I'm excited to share Lindsay's story and hard-won wisdom with you today. Let's get to it. So thanks for being here today. We were contemporaries in college, then a bunch of years separated us. I reconnected with you via social media, which is what all we middle-aged people use social media for, right? Like to reconnect with old friends, and began to see that there was quite a story in your recent past, that it was one that probably made a lot of sense to share on this show. And so you're up for it. And it's something that you're only recently recovering from. So thanks for being willing to share your story today. And without further ado, I'll just ask you to dive in. 2 years and change ago. Yeah, what happened? Tell us the story.
Yeah, my life got sort of upended around 2 years ago. Summer of 2019, I was living up in Teton Valley for the summer and with my partner, now my ex. And yeah, I just ended up having some relationship issues that summer amongst some other stuff. And I definitely was stressed out, wasn't sleeping well, wasn't eating very much, started losing a bunch of weight. I was training for some races and stuff, some mountain bike races at the time, but things just got really complicated and complex. And I would say I wasn't making great decisions in the moment, but I was just really overwhelmed at the time. And some confusing stuff was going on. So that was sort of the start of it. So I went into this, the next, August was sort of this turning point month. The first sort of traumatic thing that happened was my dog Owen got attacked by 2 dogs and was almost killed. And I ended up...
This was August of 19?
Yeah, this was early in the month. But it was just another fight or flight type experience where he got attacked by these 2 dogs. Me and my friend we were able to pull him out of these 2 dogs' mouths. Basically, I was playing tug of war with his body in this dog's mouth. And that dog, one of the 2 dogs had been slated to be put down that day. And so I was on my hands and knees, hitting the dog, trying to get my dog to not die. That was pretty stressful. And I was like hyperventilating after it was over. So it was a good reminder, just thinking about this whole timeline of my life at this point. Like my adrenaline, all my internal sort of hormones and cortisol and all that stuff was already like hyped up from all these sort of other things going on. About 2 weeks after that, I was riding my bike up at Grand Targhee Resort, which is a lift access mountain biking spot. And I was in an enduro race that day, and which is sort of a downhill mountain bike race. And I had completed the first day's stages, had gone back up to preview the next day's like trails that were in the race. And right on the last sort of easiest section down, just coming down for the day, I was going really fast, faster than I'd ever ridden that trail before because I was feeling pretty good. And I went off a tabletop jump and my foot slipped off a pedal. I was wearing flats with little spikes on them instead of having my feet clipped in. Foot slipped off the pedal. Basically, I could not recover, and I ended up landing like head first. Basically, my front wheel hit. I Supermaned off my bike. I was in full face helmet and knee pads and elbow pads and all that, but I basically landed head first, chin first. My helmet hit my face, so I had a bruise right here from my helmet, but my chin stuck out. It was an older full face. That wasn't a full downhill helmet, and my chin stuck out. It split my chin open. I landed on my arms and my legs, and
I've seen the picture. That was a pretty good gash, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a pretty good gash. I mean, I was going probably 20 something miles an hour and just stopped myself with my face, basically. Lucky to not break my jaw. I went to the ER, got my chin stitched up, got my arms x-rayed. They did a test if my jaw was broken with a tongue depressor that I had to like clench, and they twisted it to see if I could do that, declaring my jaw not broken. And I walked out of the ER feeling pretty darn lucky that it was okay, you know. Left the ER, drove back to Tucson a couple days later. I sort of needed a few days to recover. I was supposed to drive back to Tucson where I was living and working for Nohl's, and I drove back down there. And at the time I was sort of in this sort of very complicated, again, relationship thing. And within like 5 days, I made a phone call to my now ex and decided that at this point it was probably best that we break up. And I was really just confused about everything at this point. Had been sort of given some timelines and just was feeling lots of pressure and stress and did not know what to do. So things were really complicated. And
around the relationships especially.
Yeah. So I was just in this really stressful point. And, you know, I like recovered. I was starting to recover from the bike crash. I didn't have any headaches. I had a jaw ache, but I did not have headaches. I didn't have light sensitivity. I didn't have nausea or dizziness. I didn't black out from the crash. And so I was at the hospital, and a concussion never came up from the ER doctor. And I just didn't cross my mind. You know, grew up playing soccer, had a couple of concussions playing soccer in college and after college playing recreationally. And just that's what I knew about concussions, and what I had just in my head associated with concussions was like my head hits someone else's head. Or, you know, you think about people in car accidents get concussions all the time. Their head hits like the steering wheel, and you just have this very strong, like where your brain is part of your head, not like your head. So I'd had a couple concussions before, and, you know, no major impacts from those. And so again, like as I recovered, I was like, I started feeling better. I was back at work. I was definitely tired, and my summer had been so stressful that I was tired. Yeah. And then things just started getting weird. This is where, looking back now, it's like, man, I just can't believe I didn't connect the dots earlier. But I started having very high anxiety, like to the point where I was going home and drinking during the day because I just felt like that was helping, which was odd. You know, I recovered. I like found myself doing that and realized, oh, this isn't good. And I sort of stopped it. But so that was like during the workday. And then I had to travel for work up to Wyoming for some meetings. And I found myself like, so I was staying with a friend, and I was drinking like half a bottle of wine a night. And again, it was just so I could feel normal somehow at this point. And my brain, I was just looping on this whole relationship stuff. And I couldn't break that cycle. And I was feeling anxious. I was having trouble concentrating at this point on work, and was still like sort of having these weird flip-flop moments in my mind about what I should do. And that was like into October. Got back from that trip and stuff got worse. I went to a clinic. I got on a first like medication, like anxiety medication. I'd never been on anxiety medication in my life, or antidepressants or anything.
So at this point, you're kind of, and people around you are treating it as if it's, it's more of a mental health challenge than anything else going on at this point. And and by the way, I relate to that. I mean, the alcohol being an aid in the midst of anxiety, which of course longer term it's not, but I mean, when you're in the middle of that kind of stuck loop, that recursive loop that anxiety creates in your brain, alcohol does provide some temporary relief because you just relax a little bit. But you keep using it that way, and it begins to create more anxiety and create all the things that you're attempting to relieve with it. And it's such a sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing, because when you don't have a way to provide that relief for yourself yet, the level that you're operating at in the world is just so high strung and so dysfunctional.
Oh yeah.
Keep going.
It was bizarre. I mean, I'd never used alcohol like that at all. So it was an indication. And I didn't, I knew something was up, but I was just, again, like, wow, this is so much stress. I've resorted to alcohol. When I got on some medication, I got prescribed anxiety meds, and then I got prescribed antidepressants at that point, because I had started disclosing to a small, like a few people that I'd had some suicidal thoughts. And this was like totally bizarre to me. Like never in my life had I had one suicidal thought. And I told a friend that like I wanted to drive my car off the road one day.
Wow.
Which is really scary and like hard to tell someone that. But I was just so like felt like I was so much under pressure, and I didn't really understand why.
And were these suicidal thoughts just sort of popping into your mind from seemingly out of nowhere, or was there any progression in your thought that led you to a suicidal thought?
They were popping in out of nowhere, which is very strange. Like the first one I ever had, which is what 9 months later led me back to realizing that the head injury was the problem in all this. 2 weeks after I crashed, I was at a gathering, and I was just talking to someone about my summer and all these things. And I was just standing there talking to this guy. And all of a sudden in my head, it just started saying, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. Like my brain was
holy smoke.
Internal. That was like my internal dialogue, which is totally bizarre and super scary. And I just left the gathering and went home and was like, I didn't even know what to do with that, And I just tried to like bury it basically, thinking like that was a weird thought.
Yeah.
So that happened. Then I had, started having this thought, like this other, like, oh, I'm going to drive my car off the road thought, which was so crazy. And, having trouble concentrating. I got put on some medication, but I remember the antidepressants, which I'd never, I knew nothing about antidepressants in my life. And so, reading the side effects of these, I was like, side effects are like may cause suicidal thoughts. And I was freaking out. I'm like, I don't want to take these because I'm having suicidal thoughts. So I was I was super scared. So I didn't take them. I took the anti-anxiety meds and was just hoping maybe this will fix me, and things just started getting worse.
It's such a crazy thing to read on the side of a bottle of medicine that's meant to relieve depressive symptoms may cause. I mean, that just,
oh yeah,
it's mind blowing that that's a side effect. Goodness gracious.
It is. I mean, yeah.
So you stopped taking those and you're using the anxiety meds.
Yeah. I never started the antidepressants at that point. And, my family didn't know what was going on at this point. I had disclosed some stuff to a couple friends, but again, I just thought I was really having trouble processing relationship stuff. And, that stress was certainly causing me issues. Like if everything else had been fine, I really always wonder how everything would have progressed. At this point, I had stopped eating. I was not eating well. I wasn't sleeping. I started having insomnia, which I'd also never had in my life. I had lost about 15 pounds at this point, which is a lot for me. I was down to like my college soccer playing weight, which is just, I mean, I'd trained for bike races and tried to get to even half of that weight, like lose half of that weight just to try to like lighten up on the bike. And I just never could. So this was really weird to be in my like 130-pound range. And yeah, things started getting worse in November. The suicidal thoughts got worse. I had to travel for work. I remember telling some more people, coworkers that I was working with about stuff. I disclosed some of these to my ex at the time, you know, and just was trying to be really honest about things. And I think that certainly is a scary thing to hear for someone that you felt like you knew for 8 years. And I got back from that trip and I started having hard time regulating heart rate. I was exhausted at this point. Like I started not being able to get up to go to work. I was really forgetful. I was like, couldn't remember things, as this was the start of that. I was having these crazy sort of like almost out of body vibrational anxiety experiences where I just could not deal. Like I got so scared that I ended up sleeping on a coworker's couch. Like we all lived on this campus together and I ended up not feeling safe with myself, at this point. And I mean, I put coworkers in a really bad spot, and I know that. And I was like, literally just trying to keep myself alive, like totally scared at this point. I started hiding my kitchen knives from myself, which was probably the thing that scared me the most. I like hid them in a cabinet. I mean, I obviously knew where they were, but it was like the act of putting them somewhere. And then I put them in a Tupperware bin and hid them somewhere else on our campus of school, which was, again, really stressful and crazy. And that was about the time that like one day I had 130 heart rate at rest, which is, you know, my like slow paced mountain biking heart rate.
Wow.
And I could not regulate it.
Right.
I checked myself into a behavioral health hospital in Tucson, and that put me in there over Thanksgiving. I had called my brother before that, so he sort of like, maybe it was the day or two before that. But I was starting to feel like I wasn't gonna make it, like because I was so suicidal at this point, and it was really scary. And I just wanted to keep myself safe. I just didn't really know what to do. So I ended up in this hospital for 6 days, and it was like a lockbox. You know, it's like they don't let you outside for more than 10 minutes a day. You're in like group therapy classes, like total out of weird, crazy experience for me.
It's so interesting that even while you're having these suicidal thoughts that are preoccupying you, there's this other part of you that seems to have been observing what was happening and acting on your behalf to keep you safe. So it's almost as if you were aware that the suicidal stuff was coming from somewhere not truly within you. It was like a foreign entity.
Yeah.
And you were aware of it and trying to do your best to manage it. What a crazy, like, double world to be occupying. That must have just been excruciatingly painful, mentally, psychologically, emotionally. I mean, I can't imagine that kind of tension within yourself.
It was crazy. I mean, if you ever read The Untethered Soul, it's a great book. You know, it talks about the you and then the like you above you that like is that knows things, but then you have the like constant drone of your daily, like what you say to yourself. I mean, you're always having thoughts and you are always telling yourself things. And a lot of time we don't listen, but we listen. It's very subconscious. But then there's like the you that sort of can like step out of that and then focus on what you're saying to yourself and try to stop that. It's sort of like the knowing or the like it's like the awareness, you know, mindfulness piece that, you know, it's now practiced around the world more and more, thankfully. And so, yeah, there were these moments of me being like, this isn't me. But they were starting to become so regular that I was losing that a little bit here and there of like, you know, like I knew something was wrong, but again, I didn't.
Losing that separation?
Yeah, just like the weirdness started feeling more normal. And so I had sort of lost a little bit of like what was normal me of like healthy, happy, joyful, energetic, motivated, functional, cognitively functional Lindsay, which, you know, had been 42 years of my life. Pretty like high functioning person, human, like, and so I was just like, man, I just was like, God, this is crazy that I am having this much trouble processing this issue. And so, I find myself on Thanksgiving in 2019 in a behavioral health hospital with, a number of other humans. And it was like very surreal experience. And I was still having suicidal thoughts. And, I knew I was safe there because they take away all your strings and your shoes and your belts. And you have only a couple changes of clothes, and you sleep on these plastic mattresses with the door open, and they shine lights on you every 15 minutes at night to make sure you're still there and or sleeping. And they keep they keep tabs on you. And I am like, what am I doing here? And there's like a little payphone. So I was like talking to some coworkers and friends, and I didn't have access to my phone, but was able to give a couple people the number. So they were calling to check in. And my brother had called my parents to tell them what was happening, which was, my brother was like a total saint in all this, because like out of the blue phone call again. So they kept me there for 6 days, which was a long time. And I checked myself out, and I go back and think, okay, I got started on a bunch of medications there too. And I was on 2 antidepressants, and I think they kept me on the anti-anxiety meds, and I was on a sleep med because I wasn't sleeping. And while I was there, I remember just thinking, I'm just so tired. I just need to like hydrate my body and rest, and that will save me. Like I'll be better. But, maybe these antidepressants will work. And I get out of the hospital, and I go back home and think, I am like, all right, I've got to be better. I just had this crazy experience. It's going to kick me out of the thing. It's after Thanksgiving, our work season's wrapping up. Like people usually travel in the month of December, and I had plans to go up to where I live, sort of where I live now, and just ski and see friends and check out. And I got out of the hospital and was like, I can't do that. I can't function. I literally still could not function. And at this point, I'm starting to have vision issues. And I was having people from work drive me around because I was scared to drive because I couldn't figure out, but everything felt slightly off depth perception wise. And I was like, so then I started thinking I was having side effects of medication. But I had gotten put on so many medications all at once that I didn't know which ones. So then it was so intense. I was like, I can't travel. Like I literally could not imagine myself having the energy and the wherewithal to get on a plane and fly anywhere, like to my parents or to my brothers or anywhere. So I had friends fly into Tucson to like basically care for me, which was crazy. Like they were cooking me food, driving me around, taking me to doctor's appointments. And I thought, okay, well, this, like I can't even make myself a bowl of cereal at this point. I was starting to have these weird fear responses. Like I couldn't be left alone in a room. I was scared of making food for myself, strangely enough. I was scared of cutting vegetables. I think there was some weird connect with like fear. My like amygdala was injured. Like I was in fight or flight to like the nth degree. Like someone would like leave, like people that were trying to care for me, they would like leave and go do an errand. And I was like panicked that I was alone. And I think some of it was this overlap of like, I don't want to be left alone because I think I'm going to hurt myself. I don't want to be left alone. I don't want to cut vegetables because I had been scared of knives. Like there was this whole conglomerate of all these things that had freaked me out that then became these things that I was like totally panicked about. I was out of that hospital for about, I don't know, maybe 10 days. In that time, my ex's mom passed away. And that was another just big, giant trauma stress that got lumped into what was already really stressful. We had been communicating some. I mean, if I had been healthy, I would have hopped on a plane to go to her memorial service, like in a heartbeat. And I just like literally couldn't even get off the couch at this point. I had started having these anxiety attacks that were hours long. And it wasn't a panic attack because I've had a couple of those in my past, but these were, my chest would tighten up. It felt like I had a cactus, like a cactus ball in my chest. I couldn't breathe my way out of it. I couldn't think my way out of it, distract my way out of it. I had friends like reading me stories while we sat outside. So I was just like, they were reading out loud to me while I was under a blanket, like just trying to get rid of these anxiety attacks. And it was my body just like totally in freak out mode. I would play video games on my phone to distract myself because they made me not want to be alive. I was like, this is the end of me. Basically, the only thing I could do to get rid of those was take Xanax.
Well, it's just this perfect storm of things. I mean, perfect in quotes, but I mean, just, the circumstantial things with your relationship. I mean, that's traumatic anyway. That kind of loss after I think you mentioned 8 years of being together.
Oh, man.
That's traumatic in its own way.
Yeah.
What amazing friends, by the way.
Oh, man. These people saved my life. People showed up for me in ways that I don't even think I've fully processed how to thank these folks, because I've been still trying to just get better. But I will say, with complete understanding of my friends and families in my life, I would not be here without that. And I'm so damn thankful for community and having spent a lot of time building friendships with people over the years and having this great community of people I've met through jobs and having a supportive family, because I don't know what I would have done. There were a million moments where if I hadn't had a support system there, or someone sent me a text or whatever, it could have just gone off the rails immediately. So these anxiety attacks were starting to crush me, and I was having to take Xanax to dispel them, to calm back down. It's hard to even describe what these things were, because I've read about panic attacks, I've read about anxiety attacks, and they don't feel like either, really. Anyway, these things sent me to a treatment center. So I was starting to feel like I don't know what to do. I wasn't sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, well, the behavioral health hospital didn't help. What else can I do? I have to get better. And so I ended up at this residential treatment center.
What's the difference between the behavioral health center and the treatment center in terms of their approach?
Yeah, well, the behavioral health center is we're keeping people that are suicidal and have severe mental issues safe, and there's not a lot of individualized therapy. They just aren't built for that. They're basically keeping people safe. The treatment center was, you have a lot more freedom. You have individual therapy. There's it was a very nice facility. It's called Sabino Recovery. And, it was a 5-week program, and they have, you go to the cafeteria and they cook you food. You have leeway to walk around outside. You get massages, you get acupuncture. It's a very holistic place. They have a psychiatrist on staff who prescribes medication. They have a doctor on staff who, will help you with blood work and just sort of, again, see what's going on. And a lot of people are there they treat your trauma, depression, addictions. Again, mind blown that I'm in this place, and it wasn't covered by my insurance. So it was a lot of money to go there, but it was again, I'm at my last resort. I'm I don't know what else to do. And so, I go there. There's some great people there. I met some really great folks that were also residents there, and have stayed in touch with some of them. And the therapists there were amazing, and the people there were amazing. Just felt like it was a nice, it was a fit. While I was there, I had this hope. I needed hope. That was all I needed. Was just I need hope that I'm going to get better. I need to get out of this state. And so when I got there, I was pretty hopeful. I had a couple instances of those anxiety attacks, and it was interesting. It was we went out to a movie on Christmas. So I was there over Christmas and New Year's, the 2020 decade change thing. And
you spent your holidays that year.
It was
oh my goodness.
It was crazy. We left to go to a movie, and I had an anxiety attack out in public at this mall, because I lived in Tucson. A lot of people didn't live there. I was one of the only people that lived locally, and I went to this mall that I'd been to and watched, gone to movie theaters, and I basically had these anxiety attacks in the movie theater, and was oh my gosh, I can't be out in the real world. I felt safe inside the the gates of this place. And so I started freaking out, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to go outside in the real world again. This is, again, my brain was just so sick and so couldn't function or process things. So at this point, I'm I can't remember a thing. I'd have a therapy session and I couldn't really remember. So, you think, oh, therapy, talk therapy, I'm just going to work through all these issues. And I couldn't come to any conclusions. I couldn't remember what we had talked about. I was taking notes and notebooks, and people were some other folks would make fun of me about how many notes I took. And I was but I'm just trying to remember things. And There was a few days in there where I started feeling like I was getting better. I had had some blood work done, and I got off medications there again, like because I thought all the vision issues were a side effect of antidepressants. So I got off all the stuff, and then I got worse and worse, like depression wise. Like I think it was because it was like halfway through and I wasn't like better and I was still having issues and I couldn't regulate my emotions. I started getting irritable, which was one of the, when I was in the behavioral health hospital, this is sort of funny. Like they ask you your anxiety and depression score every day. Like you wake up and you have to go to this meeting and they tell you to circle a number between 1 and 10. And I literally kept saying to like the people that work there, what is depression? What does that mean? And they like printed out something on the internet to me that had the like 10 things of depression. And I was like, oh, and I was like, I have 9 of 10 of these, like, holy crap. This is what depression is. Like, that's how oblivious I was. And I had no reference point to like, this isn't normal because I'd never had depression before. And so I just was like, when the visions, like all the weird things that were happening, like some of those are signs of depression, but like, looking forward, a lot of those are signs of head injury as well. And so I just was chalking it up to depression. Oh, I'm just sad. I had this major life stress, and again, some of that is very true. But I started becoming more and more depressed in the treatment place. And I was writing journal entries that were very grim, and I was scared to leave, basically. It got to that point. And as around the last week, I was really scared. And my brother and my dad flew out for like what their family program is. And I was like fairly unfunctional during that. I was very excited to see them, but they came out to like check me out and help me get set back up. And I couldn't leave. Like the day I was supposed to leave or the day before, I was like, I was sitting on the ground with some of the staff at the place, like with my hand, like balled up and just shaking it's crazy to think about it now. Like I couldn't think. I was like, the day I was supposed to check out, I was shaking. They ended up having to put me on Xanax that day. And I basically stayed another week because I couldn't leave. So that was another bunch of money. And my brother and dad sort of stayed in town. I think my dad flew home for a few days and then flew back out. My brother stuck around. He like was able to come and take me on some like walks around outside of the place and try to figure out what I'm going to do. And so I left. I was basically left that next week because I didn't have another choice. And I was worse than when I started. So this is now February. And I'm still like, what is wrong with me? And I go back to where I lived, where I worked, and my dad stayed with me. And he took care of me for about 6-7 weeks. I was seeing therapists. I was in an outpatient program. I was trying to untangle all the issues that were wrong with me. Right around this time, I started having gut issues. And so I was basically had diarrhea like 15 times a day. Like I was not digesting any food. And then like the like news stories of COVID started trickling in, and and that was this sort of thing in the background. So I was like, wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I was having gut issues, I was couldn't remember anything. I was having suicidal thoughts every day. At this point, I was trying to go back to work because I'm like, I'm going to lose my job. Like I've been out of work. I'm on family medical leave. I'm like running out of paid time off. Like I want to just be a functional human. I'm in charge of this like program. And I had been the director there for, over 10 years. And so I was trying to do our budget stuff. And I was like looking at these spreadsheets and I literally could not understand how to maneuver numbers around in spreadsheets. I was like trying to read emails and my brain was like, I don't know what this says. Like it got so bad that I couldn't make sense of words, thoughts. Everything was overwhelming. My brain just kept telling me, I can't do that. I can't, that's too much. It's too complicated. I couldn't put my pills in a pill box. Like I got home. I remember I walked into the house and I was like trying to figure out the thermostat. And I remember thinking, okay, I have a heater and a cool setting. And this is the temperature on the thermostat. And I can't figure out, I need to make it like cooler in the house, but I couldn't figure out if I had put it, like if it was on heat or cool and which way I needed to move the numbers. Like that's how dumb I was. And I just was like, something is really wrong. But again, no connection to the head injuries. And so I was just lost in these moments. And friends were checking in, friends were calling, like those were pick-me-ups that, again, just saved me from hurting myself. Because I would wake up and immediately I'd be suicidal in the morning. Like nothing had happened yet. And I just started having these thoughts, and they were just coming out of nowhere. And it was like, you can't kick them out.
In the midst of all this, COVID's ramping up, which is, I can imagine for you, you were aware of it, but it was the least of your concerns.
Side issue.
Yeah, that anxious state makes things that normally would be super alarming, almost irrelevant because, again, you're just trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other.
I read this quote a while back that said, traumatized brains don't act according to logic, they act according to survival. And that hit home so much, like thinking back. Like I was just trying to stay alive and I was doing whatever I could to do that. And a lot of it didn't make sense. And so like a lot of it just didn't align with what I would do if I was healthy. But again, no one can feel what's going on in your body. I mean, this is something I've very much learned. Like, so, invisible illnesses, like mental health issues and all these like autoimmune issues. A lot of people are struggling. I mean, a lot of people are struggling with invisible illness out there. And it is impossible to be someone like that has that. And internally, you look fine. I mean, I didn't look that fine. I looked pretty darn like sick and like depressed and just, yeah. But you do look fine and you can talk normal. But internally, everything is off and broken. And, so I think my behavior was just so out of whack for all these people that knew me. When I try to drive, it feels like I'm drunk driving. And I was trying to drive because I was like, there's this whole thing about facing your fears. And I was like scared of driving, scared of going into stores. Like scared of being alone still. And so I was trying to do those things, but it was not good that I was on the road trying to drive. But, everyone's like, you just need to do it and get back used to it. You just haven't done it for a while. And I was like, all right, and it was like I was cross-eyed. Like I was having vision issues, like later it made so much sense. Like vision issues are a very common thing with head injuries. But again, I thought I was having side effects of meds still. So I got put back on antidepressants after the treatment center and was like meeting with psychiatrists, and I was back on, sometimes it takes 8 weeks for those things to kick in. I was just hoping like this will be the thing. And it wasn't at the time. So during COVID, I sent my dad home, and I just decided, hey, I got to get out of here. Like I am not functional at work. All employees and who are my friends think I'm crazy. So I got to leave. And so I went up to the Tetons and searched out some new doctors and was just like trying to get a different spin on things. And I was just, trying to stay alive because it wasn't working for me in Tucson. So I got up here and I changed my diet. I started seeing an integrative doctor. She's put me in touch with a nutritionist. I changed my diet, and I think even just going gluten-free to started helping. I was able to do some functional work stuff a little bit. Ended up moving like multiple times in a short span because there's rental situation here is crazy. But I went full autoimmune. It was interesting. I was trying to fix my gut. I was driving around my dad was driving me around. I was carrying a Tupperware with me because I didn't think I could make it to the bathroom. That was pretty grim in the COVID, toilet paper, panic of 2020, which now is funny, but at the time it was horrible. So I was going through a roll of toilet paper a day. But the diet change was interesting. I watched my body heal itself watched my gut heal with diet change, some supplements, some probiotics in a month. And I was back to after 3 months of liquid, not processing food, my gut was healed. And I think your gut has 90% of your serotonin receptors. So I sort of knew, wow, I need to heal my gut. So I was able to start driving. I was able to start riding my bike, which I hadn't really been able to do because I couldn't focus on anything. I'd go out, which is the same problem with driving. I was going out for a bike ride and I'd see rocks and the trail, and I was it was a blur. It was it was super dangerous. So I remember the first day I went for a bike ride, I'm like, oh my God, I am riding my bike. I never really thought I could do this again.
What was that like? How good did that feel?
Oh my God. I mean, they in treatment, they tell you like you need hope. And I was trying to like stay alive for something. And I was, I'd imagine riding my bike through grassy fields. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And when I was able to finally go do that, it was amazing. I was like in tears, I was like, I cannot believe I'm doing this. It was almost at 9 months at this point, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to be normal. Like I'd been sick for so long. And 9 months, having read about, a lot of people are sick for many, many more months, but I thought I was going to end my own life for many of those months. So 9 months felt like an eternity. And it feels crazy to say that. Like, I can't even have that thought anymore. Like even if I'm like trying to think that I would do that, I can't. And it's great because now I realize like I was just so sick. And it's weird that your brain can make you that sick. And that's the output of what this sick brain feels like, having your hormones off and your neurotransmitters off and all these things off. The output is depression, and suicidal thoughts and hopelessness and not feeling like there's a reason to live, which is just incredible to me. And I still don't understand it, but.
Your story has just reminded me of my own experience with head injuries. First, probably at 6 or 7 in the backyard on a swing, landed on the back of my head and got a concussion. And then, through my soccer career and other things, had other head events. I don't think many of them were ever classified as concussion, but I've hit my head on stuff a lot of times. And man, this is really weird hearing you detail your whole story, because I'm going, how much of those events has contributed? Because I think up until a point, my parents have always had said I was just kind of a normal, happy-go-lucky kid, and then things started to change. So I'm super curious in my own, like the condition of my own brain, if that's affected my experience with anxiety. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do about this if this is actually true? So this is pretty meaningful to me, Lindsay, to hear this whole thing, because it's really personal to me.
Oh yeah, I have had the thought of like, working at Nohl's for so long, like a lot of the kids that would show up on our programs were on antidepressants or anxiety meds or ADHD meds, which is also something that can be caused by depression, head injury, and all this stuff. And I have thought, how many of these kids that come have had a concussion? I am sure that there is some percentage of kids that have issues with this stuff because of a head injury, like that they don't know that happened at some point. And it doesn't, like, people hit their head on like cabinets and they deal with concussions. Like I'm on all these Facebook groups now and TBI and post-concussion syndrome groups. And the amount of people that are struggling with this out there it's immense. And some of the mechanisms of injury are not that crazy. They're not flying and hitting your head and having it stop on the ground at 20 miles an hour and have your brain, like coup contra crew in your skull. So it's definitely been on my mind. And I think for me, as I've gotten better and really made this connection, getting the word out about some of the symptoms of concussion that, like, a lifelong athlete who played very competitively, like in sports, I was oblivious to the side effects of concussion. I thought I had to have blacked out. I had to have dealt with headaches, maybe light sensitivity, all dizziness, nausea. All of those I didn't have. I had once I finally connected the dots with this therapist, which is sort of at the tail end of the story, I started reading lots about post-concussion syndrome over the last 2 years, but right away. And I literally had almost everything else, but I didn't have like the ones that I thought. And so that was the big aha, was around the time I healed my gut, I started another antidepressant called Wellbutrin, which works on the dopamine system, not the serotonin system, dopamine, norepinephrine. And literally within 48 hours, I felt like a human being again. And these drugs sometimes take 8 weeks to kick in. And I texted my dad on May 23rd, 2020 and said, Dad, I feel normal today. I'm cleaning the house and not really tired. And I feel, quote unquote, happy. it feels crazy. I think the Wellbutrin is working. And we had this short text exchange. I texted one other friend, similar exchange. And that was the last day of the downward spiral. Every day since then, I have been healing basically. And every day before then, I was getting worse and worse and worse. And, there were moments of like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little better. Like the diet change allowed me to drive. I was starting to ride my bike again. I was starting to do some stuff, but ever since that, and it was funny, the same week I started with a new therapist because like they were kicking me off sort of telehealth. I was still seeing people in Arizona at that point from Idaho. And she asked, during intake, she asked me about head injuries, which is a great question. I'm sure I was asked it at some point and I just rattled off, oh, I've had these 2 concussions, playing soccer. And then I sat there and paused for just a sec. And I said, I did hit my face really hard in August. And then I had this other thought. And I said, oh my God, that first suicidal thought. And I looked it up because I had it on my calendar of like this little gathering we had. And I said, that was like 2 weeks after the head injury. And the light bulb just went off. And I was like, huh. Oh my God. And the therapist goes, oh yeah, you can have depression from head injuries. And I was like, you can? And then, we got off that call and I was like, started my WebMDing session for the next 2 years of post-concussion syndrome, which a term I'd never heard, and traumatic brain injuries. And the more I read about it, the more it made sense, vision issues, depression, anxiety, concentration issues, emotional. You can't regulate your emotions. You can't make decisions. You can't think straight, like cognitive issues. I mean, I had it all. Insomnia. I had every single one.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I didn't just go spontaneously crazy. I was sick. I had a sick brain. And that was a huge, huge deal. Because before that, it was 9 months of me being like, what happened? And so it was the Wellbutrin, the connection with the therapist, and healing my gut through food and some supplements, all happened at the same time. And all around that time, I found I was losing my job of 18 years at Nohl's, which was really stressful. It was just another blow, like pull the rug out. I'm starting to feel a little bit better, but COVID sort of imploded the school. Then it got all complicated with, they were trying to save money and they closed the campus I was working at. They opened it back up again, but then they cut the director job. So I didn't ever really get asked to go back in any capacity. So that was a lot to process. But at this point, at least I'm starting to feel better. And so I'm an unemployed 42-year-old recovering from a TBI.
My gosh.
Starting like to landscape for work while I'm unemployed.
So you said addressing your gut health, the Wellbutrin, and therapy.
Yeah.
How was your brain? Was it just the passage of time that was allowing your brain to heal? Was Wellbutrin actually promoting brain health? What was going on that you're aware of and that's actually helped to address the brain injury?
The more I read about brain injury is like inflammation. And there are certain cells in your brain that will come and try to fight something when you have trauma to your brain. And then if you have another trauma or you have more stress or more, traumatic experiences, they stay on and they just start wreaking havoc in your brain. So I'm sure I had neurons that were disconnected. Like, when you hit, your neurons shear. And so that throws your brain for a loop. So it causes inflammation. There's all these cells called microglial cells that just like start wreaking havoc. So I was dealing with all this brain inflammation, which eventually through your vagus nerve, which is like your gut and your brain are connected. You've probably heard like your gut is your second brain, very connected. My gut started getting leaky. My brain was leaky. My gut was leaky. So those were things that were basically happening. So the diet, I was just eating vegetables, meat, and some oils and fruit. An anti-inflammatory diet started tamping down that fire in my brain, and it started healing my gut lining, which, again, there's a lot of new research about gut health out there and how gut health controls mood and all sorts of things in your body through the vagus nerve, your connection to your brain. So I think healing my gut was huge. Tamping down the inflammation was huge. On the physical side of things, I did some tests that summer. My hormones were all out of whack. I ended up on thyroid meds. I had some thyroid issues. I ended up with an autoimmune condition that I still don't really know what it is, but It's on the low end of autoimmune titers, but things I'd never had before. And so like my whole body just had started cratering. It's taken a long time. It's taken 2 years to build that back. Like I was exhausted that last summer. I started feeling better, but I could not get out of bed. And then I had this test that said my cortisol was like a flat line. If you ever heard of adrenal fatigue, when you're stressed, your adrenals will go, you'll have like cortisol just shooting out of you all the time when you're in a stressed out state. And eventually, if that gets worse, it's bad enough, your adrenals just stop working. So then your cortisol levels, you just don't produce cortisol or you don't use it. It took a while to get that back. And that was a lot of, get enough sleep, eat healthy, try to reset your circadian rhythms by going to bed and waking up at the same time. Try to lower your stress levels, which was really hard when I just lost my job and was unemployed, was losing my health insurance, had just spent thousands of dollars on medical care that wasn't covered by insurance. And like supplements aren't covered. Integrative health medicine, which is what saved me, is not covered under insurance. Like the medical system is crazy. So it just took a while, and I wanted it to be fixed immediately all those months, and I just wasn't. And I've had to sort of sit in that and learn that it just takes a while. I started doing some biofeedback with a naturopath, which is some like brain sort of electric stimulation in your brain. I started, again, I was been on all sorts of supplements that lower your inflammatory response. And I've continued with talk therapy just because life has changed so much that I think that's helpful. I mean, I used to poo-poo like, oh God, you have a therapist. You must like, how can you not deal with your own life? And now I'm like, oh my God, everyone needs a therapist. Like, it's just like a coach, and I was in a life coaching program when I hit my head. And so I was thinking about getting into coaching. And so I had started understanding how important it was to be able to have a neutral person to talk to, as being a coach, and how important that is. And so therapy's been great. I'm still with the therapist that discovered, helped me put two and two together with the head injury. And she's been great. And it's been fun because she, when I first saw her, I was still suicidal. And now it's been 18 months or so. And, she's just like, you're my success story. And I was like, it's just cool because she's at least seen me at my worst. I wasn't already sort of getting better. When I saw her, I was just almost there. So yeah. It's been helpful to have that because she can come back and be like, remember where you were 18 months ago?
Thank God for her.
Oh, yeah. And I've gotten off all the other meds I was on. I was on like 5 medications at one point that were all like anxiety, like trying to lower anxiety. And I've gotten off all of those. I'm still on the Wellbutrin, and I've been trying to get off that just to get off meds because I never want to be on meds, and I was never needed to be on meds. But the psychiatrist I see still says, hey, your life's really still changing. Like I have moved 5 times since I've moved to Teton Valley, and I switched jobs a couple times. My first winter in like very cold temps. I used to live in Tucson. It was all sunny all the time. He was like, you're not having side effects. Just stay on the stuff. You're on the lowest possible dose of this stuff. Now my old dog Owen is on his last leg. So, I'm like, well, that's going to be another loss. And I've really had to do a lot of work around antidepressants as a stigma. And, it's out there in the world. You're on antidepressants. You're like less of a human. You can't function on your own. You need meds. And it's like, you know what? It was so clear to me that I had a dopamine issue in my brain with how fast that stuff worked for me. Like it was like the key went in the lock and I turned back on, as a human. And so I know it's not me. I'm not the meds, but there's still that, hey, I just want to be normal. I don't want to have to be medicated to feel like can keep myself at this like happy state. But, for now, if I need that, I need that.
Wow. And here you are, healthy and in your right mind. And yeah, I'm just so thrilled that we're able to have this conversation today, because it wasn't many months ago, a year and a half ago, where, for 9 months, you were on the brink of not being here any longer. And you really had lost your mind in a sense, and the future was very much in doubt. And I'm just, number one, super glad to be able to have this conversation today. Glad you're still here. Glad that, that the pieces of the puzzle slowly got put back together, and
thank you.
And you understand better what was happening, and you understand better the path ahead. And thank God for that therapist, and again for friends and family who were there every step of the way. And when my anxiety was the most acute, there were some people who were instrumental like that for me too, who, had they not been willing to spend hours with me as I just sort of unloaded my experience with them, I think it's likely that it would have turned out worse for me as well. So now you're recovering and you're substantially better. And on Instagram, I see that you're racing again. And I mean, you're putting in some serious miles on your bike, and your Instagram feed is just full of themes of gratitude and courage and growth through discomfort and adversity. I want to hit on that. In what ways have you changed as a result of this experience? Your outlook on life, your relationship with death, what is this new Lindsay?
The first thing that pops into my head is, one, I feel like all the time I have now feels like bonus time. Like I was convinced I wasn't going to be here, and I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I just didn't think I was going to make it. And which is really scary because it's for me, it was at my own hands. It wasn't like I was not struggling to breathe or I had a tumor or something. It was just this weird feeling of I'm going to do something. And I don't know when or why or how, and I just need to keep myself safe until that point. So now, and I don't want to lose this feeling, because as time goes on and I now forget what it feels like to be sick, and I know what it feels like to be normal or happy or joyful or all those things, like functional human again. I don't want to lose that, but it's like, well, my whole life motto now is fuck it, why not? Mm-hmm. When fear has been this big thing for me since I've gotten better, because I was again, I read you that quote about being traumatized and just operating out of fear and survival. I don't think I could ever be as scared as I was on a day-to-day basis, in those moments. And so now the things that I used to think were scary are that's not scary, that is just something you got to do. And what? Oh God, yeah, just child's play. And so why not do that thing that's scary? And I'm not making decisions that are dangerous. For example, one of the big things for me, and mountain biking was something that I did with my ex. We started doing it together after, another, near life incident where I got dropped on a rock climb, where I used to rock climb a lot, got dropped, didn't die, got re-caught, 25 feet free fall.
My goodness.
So I stopped rock climbing. I took up biking. We started doing all these bike packing trips, which were amazing. It was a combination of lightweight hiking, but on your bike, so you could see more terrain. And I was, just love riding bikes. And so we always did that together. And I just never thought about doing one of those on my own. I was just sort of not confident, scared of, oh my God, I'm going to get eaten by a mountain lion, or I'm going to get lost, or I'll crash, and get injured. Well, did that already. So I started training when I started feeling better. I started training for a bike packing race last May. And, the race was in May. I started training long before that. But, and it was just something I had followed people doing these bike packing races. And I said, why not me? I've worked in the outdoors for 18 years. I know how to read a map. I know how to, ride a bike. I've done these trips. I know how to set up a camp. And, it's just this barrier of fear. I just sort of busted right through it. And not to say it's not still there, but I think I have to just mindfully be come on, you got this, And so I went down to Arizona last May, and I entered and started this 300-mile race. And, again, there's all these other people, and I think 50-something people started this race. And I was the last finisher, but I was I think 25 people finished, because it was 300 miles. It was cold. The weather fluctuated between 90 degrees and sunny and raining, which I didn't have a raincoat because no one thought it was going to rain in Arizona. And it got down to the 20s. And so there was a lot of scratches, and it was a tough course, 25,000 feet of climbing over 300 miles.
Goodness gracious.
And I was I didn't drive 900 miles to scratch, after this trauma I've had. I'm I am finishing this friggin' race. And I finished in 82 hours. Took me basically 4 days. I finished the afternoon of the fourth day. And I, just when it got hard, I just was keep walking. It's one foot in front of the other. It's one day at a time was that thing I had used while I was sick. People kept telling me that, and it, it resonated. It was 1 hour at a time, one half hour at a time for me for many, many, many days of like, I'm still alive. And I woke up the next day and I don't feel better. And I'm like, well, I'm still alive. So, being tired and exhausted on a bikepacking race felt again like nothing. And it was funny in those moments of exhaustion after like, sleeping for 3 hours and getting up and, I rode 125 miles the first day and the next day was 80 something. And I just remember thinking, I am not as tired as I was when I was sick and I was doing nothing and I literally could not get myself off the couch to go walk to the bathroom.
Wow.
That was just, something scientifically was wrong in my body. It wasn't like I didn't want to get off the couch. It was like I did not have the energy. And so that's where depression is this crazy thing because you just are like, you get diagnosed with depression. You're like, well, great. Okay. But like, why? Like, what is this thing? Like it has to be scientific. As a biology major in college, like I kept coming back to like, there is something wrong with me and no one can tell me right now what it is and how to fix it. And that was like one of the more frustrating parts of this whole thing. You see doctors, you see psychiatrists, no one's telling you what's wrong.
I bet.
No one can go in your brain and figure out what's wrong. And that's where this whole mental health thing, the whole, epidemic of this is just so hard. Because, I'm sure you felt it with your anxiety. Like, what's happening that I'm this anxious? Like, that's not you. There's something there's stuff in your brain that is just off, right?
Yeah.
And it happens for so long that you think it's you, but it's not. Continuing to read about depression and head injuries and all this stuff is something I've continued to do. Right now I feel like I'm 95% better. And I proved to myself in May with that race that my energy was back, because whenever I was tired before then, I was like, am I sick tired or am I just tired because I did some stuff and I should be tired because I had forgotten what it felt like to, again, be normal. And so I was always questioning myself. I didn't trust that I was back. And that race was something that I had not done before I was sick. I was like, I did something harder than I did, before I was sick.
Oh man, what a moment.
Oh yeah. That was so huge for me. I was so, dare I say, proud of myself.
Must have felt so triumphant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I was just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I cannot believe that I just did this. And I was that sick a year ago. While I was out there, it was a year. I think it was a year during the race, potentially, or right around that race where I had that, I took that Wellbutrin, text my dad and was like, I feel better. Like a year was during that race. So that was a pretty big deal for me. So the only thing I struggle with now, like all the rest of the stuff, I sleep great. My diet has sort of gone back into the somewhat inflammatory mode, but my gut health is good. So I've dabbled more in bread and gluten, and I probably need to flip the switch back, but it tastes so good. But it makes me feel normal that I can eat what I was eating before. The one thing I still struggle with is memory, and I have trouble remembering things. I have trouble remembering people's names. It's like my face recognition isn't that great anymore. I remember people I know, but it's like new people. And I've certainly met a lot of new people with my new job and living in a new place. I write myself a lot of notes. I have to tell people, hey, I'm so super sorry. Like, can you tell me your name again? And again, I get a lot when I tell people I've had this brain injury. My memory's not great. Oh, my memory's not great either. We're just getting old. And I'm like, yep. And, internally, I'm just sort of like, and I know this is not that, You
have no idea. Yeah.
And it's so hard because memory is so subjective. And so I'm still struggling with that of when do I feel like I've gotten that, fixed? And I'm not sure I ever will. And it's hard. There's not someone to tell me that I'm remembering better than I used to, or, I don't know. I'm still struggling with that one, but I'll take that over the rest of it, for sure. I'm 95% back.
Thanks for sharing your story. And that's a very, very, very personal and very, very painful journey. And no one but you knows just how painful that was. I have some experience with the anxiety stuff and some of the depression stuff, so I can relate on a level, but only the person that's gone through that invisible illness, like you called it, really knows what that internal pain is like. And I'm just so glad that you've emerged from those depths. You found yourself again. You found the things you love again, and you're building even more bravery as you face these fears, and you're living, it sounds like, with more guts and gusto than you did pre-injury. And that's a win. And so as we kind of land the plane on this conversation, I'm wondering, what do you hope we get from your story? You know, if there's a moral to be gathered, to be gleaned at this point from Lindsay's story, what is it? And what do you hope we take away?
I guess like one of the things that I feel like I've lived with since is just being kind to other people. You really don't know what's going on in people's worlds, you know? You see people, they look normal and they react a certain way, or they're struggling with certain things, and it's easy to be quick to judge, and you really don't know what folks have gone through in their life or are going through in the moment even. And I think that is something that I've taken away, you know, I hope other folks can take away. Like, again, as I've sort of never would have put myself in a bucket of having a mental illness, but empathy for that. It's hard to, if you haven't lived it, it's hard to really know. I think it became so clear to me during this that you really only have what the moment that you're in, because there were so many times for me where I was just, when I thought about the next day, the next hour, it was black, like pitch black, as opposed to this sort of light or like thinking ahead of like, oh, I'm visualizing myself what I'm going to do like next Tuesday because I know I have this thing. And I just saw black. And so having to really focus on, you know, like anything can happen at any moment to change your life. And, you know, in a way that it can be good or bad. And a lot of times you focus on the bad of like, oh my God, I could find out I have cancer tomorrow and my whole life goes and changes. But you can also like, you know, meet your soulmate tomorrow. You can also have this amazing experience with someone or by yourself that you just hadn't dreamed of tomorrow. But really focusing in on what's happening today, how can I make this day the best it can? Like for me, having had like almost my entire life pulled out with a rug underneath me, health, job, partner, home, because my home was part of my job. So, you know, all the things. I've really tried to fill my life up with things that bring me joy and trying to recapture that. And so, you know, having something that's going to be in the future that I look forward to, filling it up with like friends and community and things that keep you going. And so having that in the future, but then like really focusing in on like what I'm doing in the moment and just relishing in that. I feel like that's a big takeaway. And I think for me, just like this whole thought around, you know, courage over fear. And that was something that I really thought about during that bike ride as I sort of faced some fears for myself of, you know, how do I live with courage? How do I live with bravery? How do I do the thing that is hard, you know, and continuously show up every day and choose that, you know, and it's really, this whole thing has really like moved me out of my comfort zone. Some things that I felt like I could never be that person or I could never do that thing. I've just said, why not? Why not me? You know, I can do that. Like, and if I fail, like, you know, what are you scared of? Like, is it the failure? It's like, I failed so hard. I was so ashamed of, you know, what led me to the stress around my relationship and just like making really poor decisions. And like, I would take that back in a heartbeat. Like, I wish I could rewind to 3 years ago. Even though I've been through some stuff and learned some things, I really would love to go back. And you can't. You know, all these things are sort of constantly floating around in my mind. How do you align yourself with your values? What are your values, you know, and how do you set your life up so that you're living into those values, you know? Because you can say you value this thing, but if it's not part of your daily life, then, you know, is it really a value or is it something you wish was your value? So, yeah, just lots of time to think about that stuff and try to rejigger my life at this point. You know, I basically burn it all down. I was like, I'm like the phoenix rising from the ashes here, and I have the ability to put the pieces back in any way I can. I mean, I have some constraints around that financially and, you know, still with health things and stuff like that. But like really, you know, as the months have gone on, it's like I've thought a lot about what decisions I make decisions every day, many times a day, and are those moving me in the direction I want to go with my life, you know? And so when everything's gone, it makes you think a lot about what you want.
was such a powerful metaphor, the phoenix rising from the ashes. And Jordan Peterson talks about that when I mention him a lot these days. He's my favorite distance mentor currently, but he talks about that out of, chaos is required in order for order to emerge. And I mean, you're the epitome of that, someone who was in utter chaos for a prolonged period of time. And out of that chaos, now you're rising and creating greater order than there was there before. And of course, none of us would have wished the chaos that you descended into upon you or anyone, but it has been part of your story. And that chaos is the fertile breeding ground for new and even more wonderful things in your life, and not just in your life, but in the lives of others, because our story and our purpose in the world are inseparable. And so this excruciatingly painful part of your chapter in your story is now going to be of service and benefit to many others because you've gone through it and emerged like the phoenix from the ashes. And so I'm just excited for what's ahead for you, and look forward to staying in tune with the story as it unfolds, as you continue to rebuild and rise from the ashes. And again, just thank you for sharing your story. What are you up to these days, and how can people connect with you if they'd like to?
These days, so my current job that I started last March, I'm the executive director of Mountain Bike the Tetons, which is a nonprofit in Teton Valley and Jackson area, trying to get people out recreating through mountain bikes and creating opportunities for that. So that's been pretty fun. I also have been coaching lots of mountain bike coaching camps and some clinics, and that's been a really, again, something I was fearful of because I didn't think I was going to be good at it, and have been doing that a lot this summer, which has been great. Been trying to figure out what's next. I think eventually moving into, like I said, I've done some life coaching training, and I think that still is in the back of my mind is, how do I use, now that I've got this crazy story, can I use this for the greater good through some coaching and sharing my story, or trying to coach others that have either maybe gone through a similar or struggling with similar issues through traumatic brain injuries, or even just like big life changes and dealing with fear and anxiety around change. So that's in the back of my mind in the future. We'll see what happens with that down the road. I'm, been thinking about that some, and this experience on the podcast of sharing my story has got me thinking more about that in the future. So that's been pretty cool.
Yeah, this is a great step forward in terms of letting your story be of service to others today. And I hope it's been a good experience for you. I know it has been for me. And like I said before, there's all kinds of things happening in my own heart and mind as I think about my own experience with head injuries and anxiety. And I'm very interested in checking into some of that more. I've thought about it in the past, and knowing we were going to talk kind of brought it more to mind, but hearing your full story today reminds me of it even more. And so I'm hopeful that I can find some ways forward to maybe address some of my stuff even at this stage in life. I'd prefer to not have anxiety. If I can, reduce that, that'd be awesome. And if your story's helping me, then I know for sure it's helping a ton of other people. So keep going, press on, be courageous in your vulnerability, own your story, let others benefit from it, just like you are today. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind our audience, as always, that you are going to die, but you're not dead yet. So just like Lindsay, get after it. When everything's gone, it makes you think a lot about what you want. That's one of the last thoughts Lindsay left with us in this episode. Wow, that hits home. Listen, one day, maybe even one day very soon, you'll run out of tomorrows. You'll run out of second chances. You'll run out of time. Grab yourself by the scruff of the neck today and shake yourself awake. Wake up to the reality of your mortality, to the sacredness of this present moment, the only moment you've got. Make the phone call to the estranged family member or friend. Take the first step toward fulfilling that big dream. Do the hard thing now. Start the big thing now. Tomorrow never comes, ladies and gents. There is only today. So let today be a day like none other before it. The day that you summoned the courage to live with even more guts, gusto, and abandon by looking your mortality square in the eyes and holding its gaze, unflinching and with resolve. This is your one and only life. What will you make of it? Becoming the person you were made to be and living the life you were made to live with guts, gusto, and abandon is heroic work. It's not for the faint of heart. and it happens best in the company of others who have your best interests at heart. Connect with me to learn more about how a powerful, confidential, one-on-one coaching partnership or participation in a graveyard group can help you live even more courageously and die regret-free. And I'm excited to share that the first ever women's graveyard group will launch soon too. Connect with me on Facebook or Instagram at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com to learn more. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to follow this show, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.